Hello, welcome or welcome back. My name is Ari and today is my end of month wrap up. Now, I read a lot of books, so this is going to be really long, so I'm going to do my best to actually talk fast for the first time in my life and get through this as quickly as possible. So first, stats. In March, I read 29 books. That was 9,866 pages, 318 pages per day, and roughly 340 pages per book. Authors' genders. I read 16 books by female authors, 10 books by male authors, and 3 books by multiple authors of various genders. Let's jump into genres next. I read 14 fantasy books, 5 sci-fi books, 4 fiction titles, just general fiction, 3 horrors, 2 classics, and 1 book of poetry. The age demographic that these books are marketed towards. 22 of these are adult novels, and 7 of them for a young adult audience. The format that I read the books in, 19 of these were in a physical format, 9 of them were electronic books or ebooks, and 1 was an audiobook. Ownership. Like, where did these books come from? 13 of these books were books that were on my backlist owned shelf that I have hanging out over here in the background. 8 of them I purchased this month to read this month. 4 of them were from book boxes. There's also 2 additional ones that I didn't count with the rest of the numbers that were DNFs that did come from book boxes. 3 of them were ARCs, and 1 of the books was from the library. What are my star ratings? 2 of these books were 5 stars. 9 of these books were 4 stars. 14 of these books were 3 stars. 3 of these books were 2 stars, and there was 1 1-star read. Also, there's 2 of them that I DNF'd. Now that the stats are out of the way, let's get up to the wrap-up part. So my monthly theme this month was to read 1 book for every letter of the alphabet. So it is very easy for me to put together this wrap-up by just putting them in alphabetical order, and as you might notice, there are not 29 books in the alphabet. I read a couple of bonus books. Those will be at the end of the video. I also had a mid-month wrap-up, and I went through books from A to L in there. I am going to hold up the books and tell you the title and author of those books, but if you want an actual review of it, check my mid-month wrap-up. The things... How does this work? I think the card's over there. If I'm pointing in the wrong direction, then you can just mock me later. But I think the card's over there, but wherever the card is, it has been popped up as I'm jabbering on, but that was those books. I'm also going to scooch over that way a little bit so I have more room to put up book covers over here. Alright, for the letter A, I read All the Stars and Teeth by Adalyn Grace. For B, I read Bearers of the Black Staff by Terry Brooks. For C, I read Chain of Iron by Cassandra Clare. For D, I read A Desolation Called Peace by Arkady Martine. For E, I read A Lasso Away by Darcy Littlebadger. For F, I read 4 Seasons at Angelino's by Carolyn McBride. For G, I read The Galaxy and the Ground Within by Becky Chambers. For H, I read Here Comes the Sun by Nicole Dennis Benn. For I read An Illusion of Thieves by Kate Glass. I forgot the author. For J, I read Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy. For K, I read Clara in the Sun by Kazu Ishiguro. For L, I read Litany of Dreams by Ari Marmel. I'm doing this off the top of my head, so I really hope that was his name. Again, all of those are in my mid-month wrap-up. It's linked down in the description below if you missed the card earlier and you want to know my opinion on any of the books that I just listed. So for the rest of the alphabet, I'm going to try to hit a couple of points. I will make it as quick as possible, but sometimes I'm going to have a lot to talk about. I'm going to give you a summary of the book, my feelings about the book, if there's any rep in the book for any demographic other than cis white, if there's any trigger warnings, and what the star rating was. For the letter M, I read The Measure of the Magic by Terry Brooks. I do have an entire spoiler-filled video dedicated to the Shannara books that I read each month. So I'm not going to give a summary of this because this is so deep in a series that it's not gonna... I can't tell you anything really about it without spoiling. My feelings about this book, I didn't like it very much. There was a lot of ableism in here, where a character was colorblind and acted like it was the end of the world for her. There were also a lot of plot holes in this book. As far as rep, there's no real rep. The disability rep is so horrible in here that I'm going to say that it's non-existent. Trigger warnings for ableism, obviously, and for a star rating, I give this a 2-star. Next up for the letter N, I read Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. I mean, it's weird, but all Neil Gaiman's books are weird. This takes place in London. I assume a somewhat modern day London. It's kind of like a timeless modern. So this could have taken place in like the 90s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2010s, and you can't really tell. You have like London above and London below, and London below is like this mystical land underneath the city of London where everything lost goes. So lost people, lost items. It's really fucking weird. If you like Neil Gaiman's writing and like that like weird, you don't really know what's going on quality he's got, you'll probably like this. I thought it was good, but not great. Rep, I don't think there's any rep. It's obviously been a couple of books, but I don't recall there being any particularly noticeable rep. There's also no real trigger warnings in here, like violence, maybe some like body horror, like disgusting things in here. If you're squeamish about things you might find in a sewer, that's that kind of body horror type thing. Star rating, I give this a 3 stars. It was perfectly fine. Not my favorite thing by Neil Gaiman, but it wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. Next up is The Odds of Lightning by Jocelyn Davies. So this is basically like a coming of age type story where there were 4 best friends in New York City who were best friends up until like the last year of middle school, like 8th grade. And then the summer before they all went to high school, their like friend group broke apart and went different directions for various reasons that are covered in the book. And then this is like their senior year right before they take the SATs, and they all come back together for one more night of adventures. And it's very like contemporary in that sense, but this is fantasy. I wasn't expecting that when I read it. I didn't get that from the synopsis, but this is like fantasy, like very, very fantastical magic system things happen in this book. If you are interested in contemporary coming of age type novels with that general synopsis, you'll probably enjoy this book. It was fairly decently written, not the best thing I've ever read. It's not really my type of thing. I don't particularly care for young adult contemporary, but I did not find this bad. Rep, I don't think there's... I think that was my problem with the book. This is all about white people. This story is told so much better with like a diverse cast by other authors. But this one is very generic white people, white straight people. So if you're like really, 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 really love this kind of story and you want to read all of them, sure, it's not bad. If you really like that kind of story, you want to dip your toes into fantasy, sure. But if you think you like this kind of story and you kind of want to try it out, please read something diverse and not this. Trigger warnings for grief. there may be a trigger warning for sexual assault. It popped into my head that there was, but now that I'm thinking about it, I don't actually think that happened. I think that's something else that I read. So I want to say trigger warnings for grief is really the only one that I can recall in here, but look it up because I could be way, way wrong. Star rating, I think I gave this a 3 stars. If I gave it something different, it'll be down here in the corner because I'm too lazy to open my phone and look it up right now. But we're gonna assume I give this a 3 stars. It was fine. It just wasn't anything special. For the letter P, I read a poetry collection called Poems for the End of the World by Katie Wismere. Katie is a YouTuber, and this is her second poetry collection that she published. It got published last year. I needed to read this for one of my options for Goodreads Choice Awards this year in the poetry category, obviously. And I don't really know much about poetry, but I do watch her as a YouTuber, so I was like, okay, I could read this poetry collection. That sounds remotely interesting. This collection is not really meant for me. It was very like teenage angsty, and I have just grown past that stage in my life where a lot of the things were like, I'm sad because a boy dumped me, and I thought I was going to be with him forever. My parents don't understand me. I understand that like depression and anxiety is like a real thing that millions of people deal with all the time. But this is supposed to be about like her depressive episodes after a breakup. It just comes across to me personally as more angsty. So like, I'm sure she was depressed, and I'm not questioning the fact that she was depressed at the time, but I'm reading it as more of like teenage angst, like surface level kind of dealing, or surface level talking about her depression and not like the underlying cause. So it's like, my boyfriend broke up with me, instead of like, I'm just having a difficult time and need to work on myself. So that doesn't necessarily mean that this is bad. As far as I can tell, like, I'm not one to rate poetry. The poems are decent. There's no structure to them or anything like that. It's not like done in iambic pentameter or anything like that. It's just like a short clipped sentences type of poetry. It wasn't for me. That doesn't mean it's not for you. If it sounds interesting to you, it may be good for you. I ended up giving this 3 stars because I didn't hate anything about it. It was a very quick read. It just didn't speak to me. I realize I haven't been putting my books up there, and I should have been doing that this whole time. So hopefully I get better at it from this point. So the letter Q, I read Queen of Shadows, which is book 4. I think it's book 4. I don't know. We're gonna say it's book 4 in the Throne of Glass series. So this follows a older teenage assassin named Selena Sardathian, and her adventures of being the Empire's greatest assassin. I cannot tell you one damn thing about what this book is about because it would spoil the rest of the series, but I am trying very, very slowly to get through all of Sarah J. Maas's books. I have read House of Earth and Blood, and I have read the Throne of Glass novels before this. I have not gotten to ACOTAR yet, but I do want to finish Throne of Glass before I get to ACOTAR, so you will probably see more Throne of Glass novels in upcoming months. I forgot to talk about rep and trigger warnings for the past 2 books, because I'm an idiot. There is no rep in here. Trigger warnings for violence and war. In the last book, it's trigger warnings for like depression and like breakup stuff. I gave this 4 stars. Next up for the letter R, I read The Remaking by Clay McLeod Chapman. This is a horror novel. So this was a kind of an interesting concept where in the 1930s, Ella Louise and her daughter Jessica were burned at the stake for witchcraft, right? And then in the 1950s, the story of Ella Louise, or the story of like them being witches and like haunting shit, cursing the town, is told around the campfire. Then in the 1970s, a boy who heard that story in the 1950s makes it into a movie. And then in the 1990s, that movie is remade. And then in the 2010s, the story of the events of all of those movies and the remaking, and then the story of Jessica herself are retold in like a true crime podcast type of format. So it takes the same story and repeats it in different ways based off of what type of media is popular in those 20-year chunks of time. My feelings on this were, it started strong and then just continuously went downhill. The movie and the movie remake section of these books were very repetitive of each other. It wasn't really telling a new story. It was just kind of like repeating the same issues that happened on both movie sets. And the podcast part just seemed very disjointed and kind of like used to wrap up the story without really focusing on it being a podcast. Like, I think that part of the story should have been told in a podcast format, and that would have been much more interesting than how it actually was told. This story of the ghost and like the witchcraft burning was by far the most interesting part of that, but once you got past that, like fairly early in the book, it was just kind of like meh. Rep, there is no rep in here, at least no major rep. The podcast creator, who is a very, very minor character in here, is a black man, but other than that, there's no rep. Trigger warnings, I mean, general trigger warnings for like that you would find in a horror novel. There's death of a child, obviously like misogyny. You kind of see a little bit of like the Me Too movement type of stuff going on in there, though there's not any like on-page like sexual assault or anything like that. So overall, it was mediocre. And I think I gave it a 3-star. If I didn't give it a 3-star, I should have given it a 3-star. For the letter S, I read The Stone of Tamora, or no, it's not The Stone of Tamora by R.A. Gino Salvatore. Now, this is a book. This is actually like a bind-up of 3 books that was just turned into a single book. Like, it doesn't differentiate between the 3 original books anymore in this bind-up. And this follows a young boy named, I don't remember what, and it's not in the flap. So I'm not going to take the time to look it up. But he is an orphan child in Baldur's Gate, which is a city in the Forgotten Realms. Like, if you play Dungeons & Dragons, you know what Baldur's Gate is. If you don't, then it's not important. And he is blessed by the goddess Tamora, which is the goddess of good luck. Though good luck isn't always as much as it's cracked up to be. So he is blessed by good luck, but everybody is trying to kill him so they can take his good luck from him. And it just follows him through various adventures with his luck curse. This is a very interesting way to like explain that like trope that happens a lot of times in books. But it's written well enough where it doesn't feel, because sometimes that like gets really annoying where it's like, okay, come on, no one is this lucky. Like, why is this just working out without like any help from like the protagonist at all. Like, this is only going this way because that's the way the writer needs to write it. I hate this book. This doesn't come across that, even though it like purposefully uses that trope to be like, he shoved his sword out and happened to catch it and saved his own life. It's just like, it's fun. It's done in a good way. There's a small appearance of Drizzt and the gang in this book, and this overlaps with the events of the Halfling's Gem, which was one of R.A. Salvatore's original novels. This was written like 20 years after the Halfling's Gem. It's just the events of the novels overlap with each other. Feelings, it was fine. It was cute. You don't really need to read this if you're reading Drizzt. This is just kind of like bonus. Rep, there's no rep, I don't think. There's no rep. No real trigger warnings. I mean, there's death and violence, but that's kind of, it's like standard for fantasy stuff. So R.A. Salvatore doesn't have a problem with killing his main characters. I will tell you that. So there's death. Star rating, I think I gave this a 3-star. For the letter T, I read This Is How You Lose the Time War by, I don't remember, it's got 2 authors though. By Amal El-Matar, I think is how you say her name, and Max Gladstone. Now, this is a really, really weird book, so I don't know that I would recommend this for everyone, but if you liked The Slow Regard for Silent Things or The Starless Sea, if you like that kind of weird, you may enjoy this book. So this is a sci-fi novel that takes place in some distant future that doesn't resemble Earth at all. And the 2 main characters that we have in this book are both like operatives, like spy-like operatives for their respective corporations in the Time War. And the Time War is basically like exactly what it sounds like. These 2 operatives like travel backwards in time and change like the past in order to benefit one or the other of their corporations. The weirdness comes in here mostly because we are hearing the story from the perspective of letters that they are sending to each other, and because both of these people like exist in this like universe, there is no explanation for how, what, or why they're doing it. Like, the 2 of them know everything that's going on in this universe and what their jobs are because they have the same jobs, so there's never really any need to explain what the F is going on. So if that is something that would annoy you in a book, this book is not for you. Just the fact that nothing is explained. This is, like I said, told in a series of letters. So you have like a 1 or 2 page little, like, this is what the person is doing in their life as they read the letter, and then you'll have the letter, and then it switches to the other character and like what they're doing. And then the letter. I really, really, really enjoyed this book. I gave this 5 stars. I loved everything about it. I skipped over rep and trigger warnings. Rep, both characters are women, and so this is a sapphic relationship. This is a love story, kind of. I'm not going to explain the kind of, but let's just say it's a love story. So it's a sapphic relationship, so there's queer rep. There's a lot of violence, so trigger warnings is going to be along like the violence scale. Like, both of them are war operatives. They are not afraid to kill a bitch. So there you go. The next book I read was The Unspoken Name by A.K. Larkwood. Forgot that one. So this book is about a orc. I don't remember anybody's name, so if I'm skipping over people's names, that's on me. This is about an orc, and she was raised her entire life to be a sacrifice to the unspeakable god, I think is what his name is. The unspoken god. Something like that. And this is a god of prophecy and death. Maybe just prophecy. Maybe all gods are gods of death, and his particular thing is prophecy. I'm a little fuzzy on the details, but basically she was raised to be a willing sacrifice on her 14th birthday. So that's basically where the story starts. My feelings on this book is this should have been 4 separate novellas. Like, there are 4 separate sections of the book, and they are so distinctly different and cover such like different storylines. Like, the end of part 1 is like the end of that story. And then part 2 is like an entirely different story. It reads as like 4 separate novellas in an overarching universe and not like 4 different parts to one story. So I think this would have been a million times better as novellas, as a series of novellas, and not just one overall novel. Because what you get in the first story, you will never be able to reach the conclusion of what's going to happen in that 3rd story based off of the information you know at the beginning of the book. The 4th section is a completely different life experience, even if it's following like one of the same characters. So I did not care for how it was put together as one story, which like tanked off like my enjoyment of this. This is again a sapphic romance, so you've got that. You've got you've got a sapphic relationship, and one of the more important side characters is bisexual, and another side character is a gay man. I think that's all the rep in it. You could probably like stretch it and say that there's rep because of like the different races of the people, because you've got like orcs and humans and elven type characters with like really long eyebrows, but they're not like actual human races as we see today. But there is some like correlation there, I guess is how I'm going to say that. Trigger warnings: violence, graphic death scenes. Yeah, there's some violence going on. The other trigger warning, this one is actually very important, and another reason why I did not care for the book. The main character is constantly gaslighted by her mentor throughout this novel. He reads creepy throughout the novel, and for a lot of it, like honestly going through most of it, it was like, is he gaslighting her? Like, am I imagining in this? And I was like gaslighting myself into thinking that he wasn't gaslighting her, and I was reading it wrong. But no, I'm going to say that he was just straight up gaslighting her through the entire novel. Like textbook red flags everywhere gaslighting. Not my favorite thing to read about when like an older man takes advantage of a younger girl through like a situation like that. It wasn't for sexual relationships, but he was definitely taking advantage of her trust in him, and I hated it. Overall, I ended up giving this a 3 stars because I didn't hate the story. It was actually kind of interesting. It just wasn't as good as I had hoped it would be. Next up for the letter V, I read Vita Nostra by Marina and Sergei Dachenko. Dachenko, I think is how you say that. This is a dark academia novel that was originally written in Russian and translated to English. This is the first book in a 3-book series, but this is the only one that has been translated. This is, I mean, it's dark academia, so it's about a girl in Ukraine who is going to, like, a university college equivalent, and she meets this man on vacation, and he gives her some weird task to do, and upon her completion of these really weird tasks, I should say that he doesn't really give her a choice in doing them, but I won't say how. It's not, like, violent, just go with it. There's no, like, creepy older man, younger girl relationship thing in here, but he sets her to this task that he basically forces her to do, and when she achieves these tasks, she throws up gold coins. I don't know what the gold coins are for. That was never explained, so I feel like it's not a spoiler. But then she has to get so many gold coins. When she gets all of them, then he basically tells her that she has to go to this, like, special school. Like, she's supposed to go to university, like, in the city, and she wants to train to become a philologist. That's really hard to say. A philologist, which I looked up what the hell a philologist was and then promptly forgot. But she wants to be that, and he's like, nah, fam, you're going to this school outside of, you're going to this, like, rural school. Why is words so hard today? You're going to this rural school, and that no one's ever heard of, instead of going to one of the schools in the big city, which I assume the big city is Kiev, even though I don't know that it actually ever said that. Anyway, her mother doesn't like this idea, but basically if she doesn't go to this school and do what she's told, then she's led to believe that something very, very awful is going to happen to her mother. So even though she doesn't want to do this, she goes along with it to protect her mother, and then weird magic. Just weird magic. I have no fucking idea what the hell happened in this book. I couldn't explain it to you. I have no idea. My feelings are basically that. Like, I don't know what happened. I don't think I liked what happened. But I still don't know. I'm confused. I'm not smart enough for this shit. So I gave this a 3-star because basically the entire book I'm like, what the fuck is happening? I can't tell you. I don't know. Rep. No. There's no rep. There's no rep. Trigger warnings. Body horror. There's a lot of body horror. There's questionable disability rep in here. So I would be, because it's hard to say that the representation of disabilities in this book is bad because I don't know what the fuck was going on. But I feel as a non-disabled person who really shouldn't have an opinion on this at all, that maybe the disability rep wasn't the best thing in the world, but please look at an Own Voices view. Please check out an Own Voices reviewer for, like, how disability was handled in this book. Star rating, 3 stars. For the letter W, I read West Side by W.M. Akers, and this was just as fucking weird as Vita Nostra. I'm kind of mad that I ended up reading these back to back because I didn't enjoy it because I don't know what the fuck was going on. So I'm gonna just tell you, like, the summary of the book because that's weird enough that you kind of will get a feel about, like, what the fuck is going on. So basically, this takes place in New York City in the 1920s, except for this is like an alternate reality, and New York is divided down Broadway by, like, a fence or a wall or whatever, and everything on the west side is, like, destitute and not doing great, and then all the rich, wealthy people live on the east side. And you have to have like a passport to be able to like go back and forth between the west and east side. But the main character lives on the west side, and she is the daughter of a cop. Her father is dead. People on the west side just go missing in the dark. The dark kidnaps them, and they go missing. And her job is to solve tiny mysteries, which sounds really interesting, except for the fact, like, the tiny mystery that she is solving in this book is a lady set down her glove, or her gloves, and lost one of them. And so she's trying to find this lost glove. Like, that's literally what her job is trying to find this lady's lost glove. And that pretty much describes how fucking weird this book is. Is like, what the fuck is going on? Shit gets weird. The ending is very open-ended. I didn't like it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't like it. There's a loose, very, very, very loose sapphic relationship in here. The main character, it's not like explicitly stated on page, but she seems to be bisexual. She has a previous relationship with a man, and she seems to have a crush on a woman. Yeah. Trigger warnings, gore, violence, gore, being confused out of your mind. I don't think that's a trigger warning, but it's a trigger for me. Star rating, I think I gave this a 3-star. I might have given it a 2. Let's look it up on my old trusty cell phone. I gave it a 3-star. So mediocre. It wasn't like horrible. I read the whole story. I didn't hate it. I was just like, the fuck. So for the letter X, I read Xenu by Edith Wharton, and what I learned from this book is that in all of the videos up to this point I've been pronouncing it incorrectly, and it's Xenu and not Xingu, but Xenu, and Xenu is a river in Brazil. So this is a classic. It's a short story classic by Edith Wharton, written in New York, 1910s, 1920s. I think 1910s is where Edith Wharton, most of her work comes from. She is one of my favorite authors. She is hilarious. I love like classics that are funny in a like sarcastic way, and she does the sarcasm right. This is basically a wealthy group of women have a lunchtime book club. I think they call it the lunch club, but they get together, they eat lunch, and then they talk about books, like popular books at the time. But they're kind of like pretentious about it, and they use like buzzwords, like 1910s buzzwords, where they'll be talking about like just popular things, whether it's interesting or applies to them or not. As long as it's popular, they'll talk about it, but they won't really understand what they're talking about. Sometimes they don't. It seems like they don't even read the books, and they just like circle jerk each other being impressed by these books. A new young lady joins their circle who has just come back from a mission trip in Brazil, and instead of being like the pretentious circle jerk, she's like, no, I read books for the enjoyment of books, and oh no, I haven't read that book. I've been reading these books because I enjoy this author. And it's like, you can't read those books. Those are from like 2 years ago. That's entirely out of fashion to read those books. And they're kind of like passively aggressive, like mean to her. And then a author comes to their group to like join their book discussion about her book. And she comes in and she is just like aggressive, not passive aggressive, just like aggressively rude. And basically any question about her book that she asked the ladies, any question that the ladies ask her about her book, she'll give like a really terse or shitty answer to them. Even though they're trying to like draw her into the conversation, get her to like explain different parts of her book. It's like, well, what were you feeling when you wrote this? And some of the ladies actually asked like fairly decent questions. They were generic that you could apply to any author, but they weren't like bad questions. And she would just give like either terse or like just generally rude answers to them. And then she'd like turn it around and she'd be like, well, what did you think about this thing that happened on page 15 of my book? And try to get them to be like really specific, knowing that they didn't really read or understand her work. They're just talking to her because it's popular at the time. And then this new girl comes in and she just fucks with everybody. And that's where I'm going to leave that summary, because it's worth a read if you like classics. It's very short. It's only like 40 pages. Feelings, I love this. This is amazing. It was hilarious. It was great. I gave it 4 stars. Rep, there's no rep. This is a bunch of white women in 1910s New York. There's no rep. There's no trigger warnings either. Star rating, I gave this a 4-star. It was too short to be like a 5-star, but I very, very much enjoyed it. For the letter Y, I read Yellow Jessamine by Caitlin Starling. This is horror fantasy, I'm gonna say. The main character, Evelyn, is part of like, she's like upper class, ruling class, merchant ruling class of this city that is basically been blockaded in a war. It's a very short book, so the war thing's not really explained, but her and her fellow like wealthy people are under siege in this city, and a plague comes to the city, and it's really weird. And I don't know how to explain it other than that. It's really fucking weird. This is another one of those like, what the fuck just happened weird books. I read a lot of weird what the fuck just happened books. The magic horror, the horror magic in here is never really explained. I don't know what happened. I'm confused again. I don't know. Feelings, that was my feelings. Rep, no. Trigger warnings, body horror. Star rating, 3. And for the letter Z, I've got Zombies versus Unicorns. This is a short story collection edited by Holly Black and Justine wow. Justine Larbalestier. I think that's her name. I just keep mispronouncing it. Anyway, this has 6 stories about unicorns, 6 stories about zombies, and it's fantastic. It's fantastic. This has a lot of like really, really well-known authors in here. We've got Kathleen Dewey, Meg Cabot, Garth Nix, Margot Lanigan, Naomi Novik, and Diana Peterfriend for Team Unicorn. For Team Zombie, you have Libba Bray, Alana Dawn Johnson, Cassandra Clare, Maureen Johnson, Scott Westerfield, and Carrie Ryan. These are all young adult authors, I think. At least everything that I've read by these people are young adult novels. So how do you rate? Who wins? I did it by average. I gave every single story a star rating. Zombies won for me because they just had like a 3 to 4 star range for most of the books. Unicorns had 2 5-star reads and they still ended up losing because there was a 1-star read. So I really enjoyed this except for one story in here. Rep, there's a lot of queer rep in here. And but I think all of the characters are white, or all of the authors are white. So I'm gonna say there's a decent amount of queer rep, but not any other rep. Trigger warnings. Bestiality. That was the 1-star read. And that's what you're getting for that. Violence too. I mean, zombies, you're gonna have like violent death of family type things. One of the unicorn stories, which was one of my 5-star stories, is about man-eating unicorns, so that one was kind of violent too. So a lot of like familial death and the word that I'm never gonna repeat again. If you just like unicorns and you want to just read about unicorns, they have unicorn little icons in the top for all the unicorn stories. And then zombies, if you just like zombies and only want to read about zombies, they've got the little zombie icons in the top. This one, I would say pick this up if you want to have fun. This is not like anything serious. It's just fun. It's adorable, it's cute, it's fun. I very much enjoyed it, but it's not like the work of the year. It's a bunch of short stories for the fun of it. Alright, that takes us through the alphabet, but I have 3 other books. That's 6. I have 3 other books that I read that were not part of the alphabet. I'm going to start out with the audiobook that I read, which is Transcendent Kingdom by Yaa Gyasi. This one is about a woman who is a researcher, like a biologist researcher, I would say. That's not right, but she does addiction testing on mice. And it's kind of like her life is what it is. It's just from her perspective, and you have like flashbacks, like you have her life now with her research, and then you have like flashbacks to her childhood. She chose this career because of events that happened. Her brother ended up ODing because he got addicted to pain medicines, to opioids. And she wants to know like why, like what in his brain makes it where he couldn't get past like that addiction. Like he used to be, like he was a sports star and he ended up injuring himself, and then that's where the addiction started. So you have like that part of her life, and then the other part of her life is her mother suffers from like extreme depressive episodes, like where she's not getting out of bed for months at a time and just can't function as a human being at all, just like extreme depression. And she's afraid that if she's like afraid that she also has an addictive personality like her brother, so she doesn't do anything that she could possibly get addicted to. And then she's also afraid that she's going to turn out like her mother and have like these depressive episodes, because both situations have made such an effect on her life. Overall, my feelings about this book is it was sad. Like, I didn't learn anything from the book, and I just didn't enjoy the content. So while the writing is great, and Yaa Gyasi is a fantastic writer and all of that, I didn't personally get anything out of the book. So both the author and the characters are from Guyana, immigrants from Guyana to America. So that is your rep. Trigger warnings, death, depression, drug use, animal experimentation. I think that's it. I could be forgetting something else. Anyway, star rating, I gave this a 3-star. I didn't hate it. Like I said, the writing is great. It's just the subject matter wasn't for me, for my enjoyment. The next book I read was for Becca's Bookopoly-thon. The last book was for Becca's Bookopoly-thon as well, but it was a audiobook that I had been going for a while. This one also fit for Becca's Bookopoly-thon, and this is The Test by Sylvain Neuvel. This one's weird, but in a good way weird. So this is sci-fi where a British immigrant is taking a citizenship test, but it's not what you think it should be for a citizenship test. Like, shit gets weird quick. I mean, it's short, so of course it gets quick. I enjoyed this. This was darkly weird, and I liked it. Rep. You have Middle Eastern rep. The main character is Middle Eastern. I think that's the only rep. Trigger warnings. Violence. Death, violence. Star rating. I gave this 4 stars. I liked it. At the end of the month, I ended up getting to my Book of the Month Club book, which is The Lost Apothecary. Why can't I say apothecary? Anyway, this was sold to me as historical fantasy, and there's not one fucking ounce of fantasy in this book. I was so mad. I should have DNF'd this because it has like the cheating husband trope, cheating gaslighting husband, where he's trying to blame his wife and his mistress for him cheating. It's never his fault, and she just needs to forget him, and he does a bunch of really shitty things to get her to forgive him. And I hate that trope. And the only reason I kept reading this is because I was like, this is supposed to be fantasy. I want to know what the magic is. There's no magic. Read this shit for nothing. Anyway, basically, she catches him having an affair with his secretary, like, a few days before their 10th anniversary trip to London, and she goes to London on her own to like rediscover herself. Her husband has controlled her since they got married, and she has not gotten to live out any of her dreams because he's an asshole. And she finds, like, she does this touristy thing where when the tide goes out, you can like dig along the banks of the Thames and like find like treasures from history. And she finds this like apothecary bottle, and then she has an undergrad in like history, so she does some like academic research on it, and it follows her doing the academic research on this bottle and then dealing with her scummy asshole of a husband, while also following like the female apothecary in the late 18th century London who is helping women poison their abusive husbands. And you have those 2 timelines. There's no magic. The magic to make this fantasy is this 12-year-old girl finds a book of magic that it's like the 1790s, and she finds this book of magic and she tries to cast the spells from it, and then things turn out well for her. And that's apparently supposed to be magic. She's 12 fucking years old, and it's just coincidence. There's no fucking fantasy. I'm so mad. If you can't tell, I'm mad. I gave this 2 stars. This was awful. I hate this trope. If you like domestic thrillers with like the shitty husband, and is she going to leave him or is she not? Is she going to be powerful on her own, or is she going to go crawling back to her shitty asshole husband? If that's a trope that you like, which a lot of people do, you may like this book. I hate that trope, so I hated this book. Speaking of asshole, cheating, abusive husbands, that's what this thriller is about, and I DNF'd it. Because we just went over that. I really hate that trope. Also, the main character in here, it's from the female's perspective. She's fucking insufferable. Awful. And hers wasn't cheating. It was her boyfriend of 4 years, like, just moves out one day. She's, like, gone to work and she gets back home and it looks like he never even existed. He's deleted all his social medias, changed his phone number, quit his job, like everything he can do to ghost this woman. And she gets super obsessed about him and tries to track him down. I don't know how that turns out because I DNF'd it, because I did not give a shit about her or her boyfriend, and she's a shitty human being, and I didn't like her. The last book, also a DNF. This is The Hobbits of Tolkien by David Day. I don't like Tolkien. I think I've said that a billion times by now. But I don't like Tolkien. I read The Hobbit. It was mediocre at best. I know I'm just making enemies here. Why don't I like Tolkien? Which is not related to this book at all. I would like some chance to imagine something on my own, and Tolkien is just too descriptive. I don't like how descriptive he is. I don't want that much description. I want to imagine it myself. Just give me like a vague outline and let me fill in the blanks. Don't give me like every detail of every color and shape of every blade of grass and every leaf on every tree. I don't want that. I don't want that. The movies were fine. Anyway, this is about the hobbits that Tolkien wrote. It came in a book box. This came in Book Nerd Essentials book box. I got to the chapter about feet, and I was like, nah, I'm good. No foot fetishes for me. Bye. And after probably about an hour, I'm so sorry for the length of this, that is everything. Let me know down in the comments if you decided to pick up any of these books because of my review, or if you decided to not pick up any of these books because of my reviews, because some of these were bad. Anyway, that's it. See you next time. Like and subscribe.